Hi guys, so I decided to do a quick guide on the trade system in Europa Universalis 4. I played this game for I'd say about 25 hours now, and I've really mastered the trade system. At this point in the game, I'm playing as Portugal, and I have the highest trade income in the world, and I pretty much have dominance of Atlantic trade as well as trade coming from Africa. So it took me a really long time to get to this point. It took about 20 hours of trial and error, and trying to read the wiki and not really understanding the concepts in the wiki. And then finally, at the end of that, it all sort of crystallizes and you actually understand what the hell's going on. It takes a lot of painful, just near comprehensions, but I wouldn't say full comprehensions. So, in this game, I'm playing Portugal, the girlfriend's playing Spain, and she was my little sidekick in trying to figure out the trade system as well. You could replicate these results in a single player game, as you can ally with Spain. I'm playing Portugal, and let me just give you a quick tour of my holdings west to east. So Portugal and Spain have sort of a hegemony here in the Mediterranean, or in the Caribbean I should say. And I have a few islands here in the Caribbean, Antigua and Guadeloupe. And then I have this large colonial nation here, Krausland, which controls most of the northeast United States, as well as parts of Canada. And all these Indian nations here are actually protectorates. So the Mi'kmaq, Iroquois, and Huron are protectorates of Krausland. Krausland itself is a colonial nation under me. Then I have some stuff in Africa. I have a few provinces in North Africa, Casablanca. I have a few scattered provinces. I have one here, Luanda, which is Western Africa here. The Congo is a trade protectorate. And that's pretty much it for me. I also did explorations into India. I was the first one to explore India. So that's pretty much the current situation. The next thing we're going to go over is the trade system. So I'll start off by saying that you will never get anywhere in this game. You will never turn into a great power unless you do trade. The majority of your disposable income is going to come from trade. You might be able to break even with taxes, but in order to get enough income to build new things and to expand, you're going to need trade income. So as you can see, if I go on top left here, where my shield doesn't click the trade menu, or press 4 on the keyboard, either way. We can see that I have 29 income from trade right now. And if I go to my economy, we can see 45% of my income is coming from trade, and 20% of it's coming from trade-related tariffs from my colonial nation of Krausland. So, you know, over 33 gold is coming from actual trade income. And you can see here my overall balance is plus 14. If I didn't have that trade income, I'd actually be drawing a negative right now, substantial negative. You only get about 8.5 gold from taxation, at least I do in this case. So let's go over the trade system. The basics of the trade system is like this. And by the way, I'm in the trade map mode right now, which is above your map here. You can press it there. It's two little boxes, or you can press E. The basis of the trade system goes like this. There's trade flowing to and from trade zones, which are basically regions that constitute a local trade area. And within each trade zone, there's a trade node, which is the center of trade that can be used to manipulate the flow of trade going in and out of the trade zone. So in this case, this is the Caribbean trade zone, and you can see it's green and it says Caribbean. Okay, this is the Caribbean trade zone. Up here is the Chesapeake Bay trade zone, the Gulf of St. Lawrence. These are all trade zones, and you'll see them if you're in the trade map mode. And now let's look at the Caribbean as an example. So in the Caribbean, you see all these arrows flowing in and out of something, this little square here. This is the actual trade node. So, and you can see it also on the other maps, for instance. It looks like a little buoy with a little bell in there. That's your actual trade node. And there's little arrows flowing in and out of it. This is actually showing you the trade. So It's easier to see in Europe. Let me unpause this. Okay. What you'll see is you'll see actual trade ships. So this is sugar from the Canaries. You know, there's little ships going down these trade lanes, and so it represents flow, trade flow. So in the Caribbean Trade Center here, trade node, we have trade flowing in from Mexico. We have trade flowing in from the Panama trade zone, which is essentially Central America and also down south to Peru. That's all flowing northbound and westbound into the Caribbean trade node. And there's also trade flowing from the east, from the western coast of Africa here. We see that there's a line of trade headed westbound that flows into the Caribbean trade node as well as another trade route coming in from southwestern United States, which is the Mississippi River trade zone. Now, that's the trade that's flowing into the Caribbean. Then there's two streams that are flowing out of it. So you have one stream, you can see it here, you can see the arrows that say you know it's flowing in or out. One stream is flowing east, and it's flowing east into the Western Europe trade zone and trade node right here. And there's another trade route headed north, and this northern trade route is pushing itself up to the Chesapeake Bay trade zone. So that's the flow going in and out. Now, what you're actually exporting, what's actually represented by the income on those trade routes is, it's hard to see here because I can't actually, let me go to Europe. It's easier to see in Europe. Yeah, so on the bottom right of each province, there's trade goods. So right now, like where the gold value comes from are these trade goods at the bottom right. So this is the province of Porto. It has wine, which is, you know, worth 2.68, etc., etc. And there's a whole system of supply and demand. That's something you don't really need to worry about too much. You just have to understand how the gold gets to you and how it's divided. So right now, if I click on the trade node, we can actually break this down. There's 5.84 trade flowing into this trade node, the Caribbean trade node. And if you hover over it, it'll tell you where it's coming from. Zero is coming from the Mississippi River, zero is coming from Mexico, zero is coming from the Mediterranean coast, 5.84 is coming from Panama. So the vast majority of all the trade value flowing into this trade node is coming from the southern trade route here. These two southern trade routes here, they're passing through Central America. They're representing the most inbound or incoming trade. Then there's also local trade, and you can see here it breaks it down. So Guadalupe is producing 1.11 trade. So if I go over here to Guadalupe, we'll just look at that for instance. So Guadalupe is producing 1.11 trade, and then all the other provinces in here produce, you know, Guantanamo is producing 1.03, etc., etc. Now, you have the ability to do two things with that value. You can either steer it out of this trade zone or out of this trade node to another trade zone, or you can collect here. And those are actions that are created, that are instituted by your merchants. So you have X amount of merchants that are up here at the top, and they can either collect trade or they can steer trade. And we're going to go over that in a second. But before we do that, let's go back to Portugal itself. So Portugal here, this is my home country. Portugal here is, you know, my country, and you always collect gold from the trade node that is in your home node, or in your home zone. So it's a bit hard to read, but this zone, which includes my capital, is called Sevilla. It's a city in South Spain here. And that is the trade node that is part of the zone, which includes my capital. So because of that, I always collect gold from this node, even if I don't have a merchant there. And in fact, what you want to do, typically speaking, is you want to make trade flow towards your capital. If you can't make it flow to your capital, then you should collect where it's flowing into, if you can, if it's worth the effort of sending a merchant there. So, another concept that's really important is this concept of trade power. And trade power determines two things. It determines the amount of gold that you actually collect at a trade node, and it also represents the amount of trade that you'll push out of that node if you're steering trade. So if you're collecting trade, it's how much gold you're going to get. If you're steering trade, it's how much gold you're going to push. So let's use this example of the Western European trade node. So in this trade node, I actually have, if you click this little button right here, it actually sorts by trade power. It's a little box of the fist. I have 125 trade power in here, okay, which represents the vast majority of the trade power. It represents 56% of the trade power. Because of that, out of the income coming into this province, which is 4.59, I'm pushing 3.96 towards my capital trade node of Sevilla. So we can see here that there's 3.96 headed southeast, and that's because to Sevilla, and that's because I'm steering trade there. I'm transferring trade power there. Now, if I wasn't transferring trade power there, then this income of 4.59 would be split evenly amongst all the possible routes coming out of the Western European trade node. But because I'm steering trade power, since I'm transferring trade power here, it's steering trade southeast, it's going to me. It's going to Sevilla. And that's where I'm collecting it. So here, I'm not actually making any money inside of Western Europe itself. I'm transferring the trade so I can collect it elsewhere, which is here at Sevilla. Now, how do you get trade power? Well, there's a variety of ways. Okay, so let's go over my current trade power right now. So, I'm just hovering over the, actually, there it is. I'm hovering over the trade power in the column here. So I'm getting 70.5 from light ships. And we're going to go over that in a second. You can actually use your navy to give you additional trade power, which is, if you know anything about history, it's sort of like when the Europeans would bring huge fleets into foreign lands and say, hey, you're giving us the trade now. So that sort of idea. You also get a small amount of additional trade power from having a merchant there, but it's a token amount. It really doesn't matter. And there's also some other modifiers. But the big thing is, you know, your trade power that you're going to have in a node is going to be represented by the trade power of all the provinces that are part of that trade zone, as well as ships and your merchant. So this one is a lot easier to see because, you know, the Western European trade node doesn't actually have any provinces inside of it, doesn't have any land. But you can see how here in Sevilla, let's break this down. So in Sevilla, I don't actually have the most trade power, it's Spain. But if, you know, if I hover over 172, you'll see that in this case, I have 172 trade power. 95.8 of it is coming from my provinces. Each province that I own inside this trade zone adds to my trade power, and you can build buildings that will increase your trade power. So, you know, this is the province of Alentejo, which I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. Down here at the bottom left, it tells you down here what your trade power is. So from here, I have 4.1 trade power. This is like one of my weaker provinces, but if you look at Lisboa, which is my capital, and I have a bunch of buildings here that improve trade power, as well as the province itself has a innate trade power bonus because the game has determined that it's an important area of trade. That's 35. And it also, you can also see the trade value here. So this province adds 7.20 trade value and 35 trade power to the node. So in here, this is a breakdown of all of the local trade value. So you can see the first one on the list is Madrid. They're producing 9.06 yearly. Lisboa is at number 2, which is producing 7.20 yearly. Okay, or 0.60 a month. All those numbers added up from all the provinces in this trade zone equals the local trade power. All the incoming trade is represented by the incoming trade power. Now, in this zone of Sevilla, I'm collecting 11.6 gold out of 18.3 gold in the trade node. Spain is collecting most of the rest, and there's Algiers and Morocco, but it's a very small, pitiful amount. So you can see Spain's collecting 13.3, I'm collecting 11.6. And that's because, again, this is my main trading port inside the trade zone in which my capital lies. Now, so, you know, I automatically collect there as my main trading port. This guy, this merchant, as I said, is transferring trade power, also known as steering trade, southeast. And if I wanted to, I don't know why I would do this, but if I wanted to, I could steer trade in other directions by clicking these little arrows here. Now, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to give the trade value to my enemies. But if I really wanted to, I could transfer the trade there. Now, what I've accomplished in this game is I've completely isolated continental Europe, or at least the enemies of continental Europe, from the trade of the New World. And I've established a monopoly over there. So I'm going to show you how I did that now. Alright, so the easiest way to show you guys this is just to go west to east and literally show you how I make every penny. So let's start from the west, because that's where the westernmost border of my colonial empire is. So we can see here that, you know, the Aztec kingdom is still intact. Spain has some provinces here, and I have these two islands. I have Antigua and Guadalupe. Antigua is not even finished colonizing yet. Guadalupe is my main holding there. So and then you have, so that's part of the Caribbean trade zone. And what I want to do here is I want to make money. So how do I make money, right? Well, there's about 5.84 gold incoming and 4.48 gold that is local to the trade zone. So what I'm doing here is I'm collecting gold using my merchant. So I currently have 30.7 trade power, which is 7.4 of which is from provinces, which is from Guadalupe. 21 is from lightships, and 2 is from the merchant. So I'm collecting the gold there. Now, since I'm collecting the gold there, I don't have any influence over where the trade is flowing. But in this case, it's flowing all north, and that's because Krausland, which is my colonial nation that is a vassal of me, they have a merchant of their own. They have it here steering trade north. So 5.77 of this gold is being pushed north, which we're going to go over in 1 second. But for now, you can see that I'm making 7.4 gold, 7.49 gold a month, because 5.84 plus 4.48 is the total value of this province. And then I'm using my trade power to collect that. So I get 46% of that, which is 7.4. So this number here is a bit deceiving, where it says 4.83, because you're getting a cut of that before it leaves. So see how the outgoing here is subtracting from the total? You're going to get a cut of that before it leaves, so you're actually still making gold off of that. So the rest of the gold from the incoming trade that's being steered is headed north, okay? It's 5.77 gold, heads north. Now, this brings me to the next trade node and trade zone, which is the Chesapeake Bay. So what I've done here to dominate this area is I have my Kraus land, colonial nation. Since they're a colonial nation, most of their trade power goes to me. Same thing applies to these protectorates, these Indian protectorates that I've made. Most of their trade power goes to me. So let's go ahead and look at this trade node. You can see that, you know, the value of the incoming value is coming from the Midwest U.S. You can see this arrow flowing in from the west, from Ohio. And it's coming from the Caribbean. I'm not actually controlling what's coming from the Midwestern U.S. because I haven't gone that far yet. But there's Indians there that are pushing trade east, and it's coming to the Chesapeake. So in here, I have 40.1 trade power, which is only 44% of the trade power, but my colonial nation has 32% of the trade power. So I essentially have almost all of the trade power here. Plus the other nations that are here are essentially protectorates. So I almost have almost all of the trade power here. And what I'm doing here is I'm collecting trade. Again, with this merchant I'm collecting trade. So you add 6.46 plus 4.69, and I'm collecting 11.26 gold. Now the only trade that's quote-unquote escaping from here is this minuscule amount is being headed north through the Gulf of St. Lawrence. 0.12 is being headed north through the Gulf of St. Lawrence. But I also control the trade here. If we look on the map, you can see I have some provinces here in northern Canada. But these were once British colonies, and at one point this was the only place in which trade was escaping the New World. But over the past 10 years, I destroyed the English fleet and I took over their colonies. Now I have also the trade node up here at the Gulf of St. Lawrence. You can see there's 3 streams of income being pushed from, you know, the Midwest, from the Great Lakes, and from the east coast of the U.S., or what today is the U.S., pushing into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And here I have, you know, just a little bit of trade power from the provinces. I have a little bit from having a merchant there, and I also have some added trade power from sympathetic merchants downstream. So here I'm not collecting that much gold. I'm collecting, you know, 2 gold. But that's the only real place where I should be collecting it. Or this is the only option where I make the most gold, is how I should put it. Then, since I'm not steering trade power here, there actually is some foreign influence that's pushing the trade eastward. So Denmark and Scotland, yeah, Denmark and Scotland are pushing some of the trade eastward to here, to the North Sea, but it's such a minuscule amount it doesn't actually hurt me. It's 0.80. Now, if I really wanted to get that gold, I could assign light ships to here to even increase my trade power more. But I'm not going to bother with that. It would cost more to maintain them than it would to steal the trade from the other countries. So you can see I collect 2.0. The other trade that's left over, 0.80 and 0.80, is split between 2 routes. One goes to the North Sea, and one flows into Western Europe. Now, Western Europe is sort of where all the overflow from the New World heads up. So all these income streams, one from here, one from here, one from here, and also one from Western Africa, all of that stuff flows into Western Europe, and then it gets split from there. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm transferring trade, as we went over before, and this is where I have most of my ships to actually steal the trade power, because this is one place where my enemies can actually exert some influence. So France is here, England is here, and the German states are here, and they all want a cut of that trade. Unfortunately for them, I destroyed their fleets. France was the only competitor, and like 3 years ago, in game terms, I destroyed their fleet. Before them, it was England, and I destroyed their fleet. So they don't have any ability to exert trade power here, so I'm getting almost all of the trade, and then it flows into Sevilla, where I collect it. So, you know, my big money makers in this game is Sevilla and in the Caribbean. All the overflow stuff is basically collected in Western Europe, and I get a little bit of a payday in the Chesapeake, and that's how I make money. Now, you know, this is after decades and decades of wars and of maneuvering and stuff like that. One big thing that you cannot ignore is using your fleet and protecting your trade using your fleet. So let's just go over my fleet situation right now, and we'll go west to east. So in the Caribbean, I have 6 caravels, which are light ships. Only light ships can influence trade. Then what they'll do is they can either add trade power or they can take away trade power. They add it to you or they take it away from your enemies. So the way you do that is you have a protect trade order here on the orders pane, and you also have a privateer mission pane or order. The protecting the trade will increase your own trade power in a node. The privateer mission will take away the enemy's trade power. You can also do a patrol action, which will actually clear your trade lanes of privateers. So right now I'm protecting trade interests in the Caribbean. So these ships are basically patrolling these trade lanes, and they're just adding to my trade power. So if we go to the trade power inside the node, we can see I get 21 trade power from these ships, 7.4 from the provinces, and 2 from the merchant. So the vast majority of my trade power is from these 6 ships. And that allows me to collect more gold at the node and increase my share of the incoming and local trade value. So one interesting thing is if you click Protect Trade, it'll actually, if you hover over each one of these things, it will give you a breakdown of how much you will get by, you know, what the net gain will be by sending these ships somewhere. But it's a little deceptive, okay? Because, you know, it says I'll gain 3.73 gold if I send these guys to Western Europe, which is not true, because Western Europe has to have that trade income flowing into it in order to make a gain like that. So that gold is not going to be flowing into there. So you're not going to actually gain more gold by doing that. But that's more of a theoretical thing, saying if there was more income that needed to be steered there, you would do it. You basically add more trade power to the zone. But there is, you know, it is good as sort of a rule of thumb to determine how much gold you're going to make more, you know, how much more gold you're going to collect, rather. Yeah. So that's that fleet, and then I believe the rest of my fleet is in Western Europe. Let's see. Yeah, so then I have another 22 ships in Western Europe. So if we check out my trade power breakdown in here, I have 125 trade power, of which 70.5 is ships. Okay? That's a lot of trade power from ships. That's the vast majority of my trade power. Now, why aren't I using these ships to add trade power in the Chesapeake Bay or in the Gulf of St. Lawrence? I don't need them there because I already have such a massive monopoly on the trade power there. I already have 44% in Chesapeake just from me. Then my colonial nation under me has 32%, and under them there's a protectorate that has 9%. All those percentages add up, and they essentially aid me. So there's no reason for me to add trade power there. I'm already making good enough payday. But let's use an example. Let's say I wanted to exploit a new trade node. So here's one I could potentially exploit. So this trade node is the Genoa trade node, and it has 8.34 local trade, and it has 7.32 or 7.23 outgoing trade, right? If I wanted to start seriously pushing this trade to a place where I could collect it, I'd either have to get a large amount of trade power in the node itself and then collect the trade, or I'd want to transfer trade power westward to Sevilla. So if you track these outgoing trade routes, you can see one comes through the Gulf of Almeria here by the Barbary Coast, and it converges into Sevilla. So what I need to do is I would need to send a merchant there to transfer trade, and I would also need to send a large portion of my fleet there. And at this point, I don't really have enough ships to do that. If I was going to try to do it in this current game, I'd probably take the guys from the Caribbean and do it. And it probably, in my case, it wouldn't really, it wouldn't really make sense to me to do that. But if you really wanted to, over time, you could build more ships and you could have them exert a lot of trade power on Genoa, including privateer missions, and get a monopoly there. And then the outbound trade, the 7.23, most of it could be sent to Sevilla, where you would then collect. So I believe that's everything with the trade system. I'm just going to look over this real quick. Oh, in the trade screen itself, you can see sort of the breakdown of the all the trade nodes that are within your trade range. So all these nodes here that you see are nodes that you can actually do business in, and that's determined by your trade range. Okay, trade range is determined by technologies and by your national ideas and whatnot. So right now, from my capital, we can trade out the 338 range away, and that allows me to basically get all the trade nodes that I want. You can see that I have a hand in the Chesapeake Bay, which is the 4th most valuable trade node. I have a hand in Sevilla, which is the 2nd most powerful. If I really wanted to make a hullabaloo and try to expand, I'd probably go for Antwerp or for Venice. But they actually have to be cooperating with you. Like, if you look at Venice, see? This is Venice right here. Venice has no outbound trade. So the only way I could make money in Venice is if I massively increase my trade power inside of Venice itself and then collect it there. And that's really hard to do. Antwerp, which is up here somewhere. Yeah, here's Antwerp. Wow, Antwerp is fucking hard to understand what's going on. There's a lot of shit going on here. Okay, Antwerp doesn't have any outbound trade. Yeah, so Antwerp is a collection hub. It would be the same deal. I would need to send a large fleet over there and collect. So that's probably not worth it. I would recommend my strategy to you would be to try to push everything towards your own trade center, your own main trading port, and then collect most of your income there. But if you have the opportunity overseas, collect another secondary trade collection point. In my case, it's the Caribbean. So I probably skipped over some things. Please feel free to ask questions. This is just sort of like a crash course so you can actually understand what's going on. And I hope you enjoy.